We're continuing in this walk through 2 Corinthians. It's really a primer on how we can be an encouraging church, how we might encourage each other. And this morning, Paul talks to us for the second chapter about giving. Last chapter was about teaching the grace of giving. This chapter is about celebrating the grace of giving. You know, I don't think we celebrate enough the ability that we have to give to others. Now, this part of the letter was written specifically by Paul about the early Christians in Jerusalem. During the time of the writing of this letter, Jerusalem was going through an enormous drought. And for 6 or 7 years, they had had a famine. And the folks in Jerusalem were in big trouble. Now, the problem is that the Christian church in Jerusalem at this time was not real popular with the rest of Jerusalem. In fact, they had kind of been sequestered off to be second-class citizens. And because of that, when food was available in town, they usually were the last ones to be able to get it. And so Paul had heard about this famine, and he was going all through the churches that he had planted in the Macedonian and Achaean provinces, and was seeking an offering so that they might take some funds to the church folks in Jerusalem so that they could buy food. Many were starving and some were dying as a result of this famine, and the new churches wanted to help out. And so Paul tells us some important things that we need to know about giving. Ultimately, he wants us to celebrate the opportunities that we have to give. And the first thing he tells us about giving is that giving is noteworthy. I know you're on board and ready to go. I've been bragging about you. I don't know if you realize the generosity of this congregation. Last fiscal year, not June until now, but the previous June to July, we took several special offerings in this church. We took special offerings for hurricane relief twice. We took special offerings for the kids in the woods, and we did a couple of others. And I think I'm right in saying that in just those special offerings, which were above and beyond our regular mission giving as a church, I think we raised over $10,000. Now, we ain't a mega church, and we ain't mega rich. But to be able to give gifts in that amount, that's something to be celebrated. That says a whole lot about who we are as Grace Presbyterian Church. And that's noteworthy. Now, I don't think it's appropriate to have individuals noted for a particular gift. But I think as a congregation, it's worth noting how generous we are. And I think that it's okay to be proud of that. Paul not only tells us that giving is noteworthy, but he also tells us that giving is a blessing. Giving is a blessing. Remember, he says that a stingy planter gets a stingy crop, and a lavish planter gets a lavish crop. He talks about 3 different principles in this next section about giving and how this giving is a blessing. He says, first, there's the principle of increase. The principle of increase. A stingy planter gets a stingy crop. A lavish planter gets a lavish crop. We reap in measure as we sow. In other words, the more generous we are with others, the more generous God is with us. I don't know about you, but my wife calls me Even Steven. Because it seems like every time we get a bill from out of nowhere, we also get a check from out of nowhere. We'll get one of those, the dishwasher broke bills that are $300, and then a week later in the mail, we'll get one of those escrow refund checks for about 36 cents more than what the bill for the dishwasher was. It always works out that way. We always have the opportunity to be a blessing. And the more we bless others, the more God will bless us. That's the principle of increase. And then Paul talks about the principle of intent. I want each of you to take plenty of time to think it over and make up your mind what you will give that will protect you against sob stories and arm twisting. God loves it when the giver delights in the giving. The principal intent is that we reap with right motives as we sow. Make sure your intentions behind giving are good. If you're giving because you feel guilty, I don't want your money. If you're giving because you think you're supposed to, that's a California word, supposed to, then I don't want your money. I want you to give because you feel called by God, because you feel blessed by God, and you want to share that blessing with others. This is the passage that's translated in other translations, God loves a cheerful giver. There's a principle of increase where we reap and measure as we sow. There's a principle of intent where we reap with right motives as we sow. And then there's the principle of immediacy. This most generous God is more than extravagant with you. He gives you something you can then give away. You see, the principle of immediacy is that we can reap even while we sow. God takes such good care of us that He will always give us just enough to be able to be a blessing to others. It grows into full-formed lives, robust in God, wealthy in every way, so that you can be generous in every way. You know, we ain't the richest community in America, but we might be one of the most generous communities in America. And I think it's because we all realize how blessed we are. If for no other reason than we ain't in South Dakota. You know, we all get upset when the temperature goes down to 50 degrees. Oh my gosh, it's freezing out here. Tracy and I had the opportunity to sneak away to Panama City for the last couple of days, and I went down, and the beach was beautiful. I went down to get in the water. It was freezing. There's a bunch of people jumping around, swimming in the water. I said, hey, where are y'all from? Minnesota! Yeah, you're all crazy. We are blessed, and we have the opportunity to be a blessing to others. Now, I know that it's not just a practical thing, but part of it's practical. We've been either wise enough with our investments or hardworking enough in our career that we have the ability to be a blessing to others. And I think that's part of the principle of immediacy. God gives us just enough so that we can be generous. Well, giving is not only noteworthy, it's not only a blessing, but practically, giving meets needs. Paul says, carrying out the social relief work involves far more than helping meet the bare needs of poor Christians. It also produces abundant and bountiful thanksgivings to God. You know, the many different ministries that we do around this place meet the needs of folks in our communities. We have folks show up to the food closet or to the clothes closet or to get bikes from the bike ministry who are in need. Sometimes it's because they've done stupid things, but we make no judgments. Sometimes it's because they've made bad choices in life, but we make no judgments. Sometimes it's because they've been foolish with the money that they do have and then can't afford to get what it is that they need, but we make no judgments. You don't have to tell us why you need it on some form. We keep track of who comes to the food closet because we want to make sure we have enough for everyone, but we don't ask them their income level or this, that, and the other. We are happy to help whoever is in need. And that is fabulous that we have the opportunity to do that. Giving not only meets needs, but it also glorifies God. This relief offering, showing your gratitude to God by being openly obedient in the plain meaning of the message of Christ, you show your gratitude through your generous offerings. The Christian community in America is by far, by leaps and bounds, by geometric proportions, the most generous community in the world. And I don't just believe it's because we're wealthy, though we are. There are wealthier people in the world that don't give nearly as much. And we do this because we are blessed, and because we do this, it glorifies God. When I was working in Folsom, California, there were several Christian churches, and there were also two worship centers for other religions. Now, they were wonderful communities of faith, and I have a lot of respect for them. But when people were hungry or they were in need, they came to Folsom Presbyterian Church. They came to the Catholic Church because they knew that it's the Christians who are there to help. And ultimately, somewhere in the back of those folks' minds, a seed is planted and God is glorified. You know, I was doing weddings at Folsom Presbyterian Church. I was the only pastor in town who would marry people who had been divorced. Now, this wasn't 100 years ago. This was back in the 1990s. They couldn't get married at the Catholic Church, and they couldn't get married at the Baptist Church, and the Lutheran pastor was kind of a stick in the mud. And so they came to our church, and you know what? I didn't ask a whole lot of questions, and here's why. Because my hope was if they came to our church in their time of joy, when they were getting married, that someday they might come to our church in their time of need. So yeah, I might get a jewel or two knocked out of my crown in heaven because I might have married some folks that, you know, got divorced or something. I don't really believe that. But we were always available, and it was amazing how many of those couples 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years later would come back to our church. You see, giving glorifies God. And when we send a check to Texas or to the Presbyterian Disaster Relief Fund, folks know that we're making a difference, and that glorifies God. And finally, you weren't supposed to see that yet. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, and perhaps least reportedly, that's another California word, reportedly. Giving unites God's people. There is nothing as team building as working together to help folks who are in need. If you want to see some happy folks, go into the clothes closet on a Tuesday morning and help them sort the clothes. Those folks know that they're doing something wonderful. When we rally together as a church for some specific cause, it brings us together. And when we Christians get together, amazing things happen. Now, you know, anytime I do one of these sermons on, you know, giving or money or something, I usually get a nasty gram or two, you know, either on email or something saying, Pastor Keith, I hate it when you talk about money. Well, I'm just reading from 2 Corinthians. And I planned this sermon back in August when I was outlining all my sermons for the year, and it landed on today for a particular reason. I don't know why. Maybe you needed to hear a message today about giving. Maybe you needed to be encouraged that your giving was actually doing something. But I got to tell you, This church is an amazing place. And when we put our minds to it, we do amazing things. And it's all because of the blessings that God has given us.